Usually I would do this in one of my paranormal mystery and makeups, but because of the responses and the backlash that I've been getting for the floor that I currently am sitting on, I figured that this was a much needed educational video for all of the... Now, whenever I say this, you'll have to look up the definition because, anyways, this is for all of the people who are very ignorant whenever it comes to a Ouija board. Now, while I do this video, I'm going to be doing my own thing. I might be reading off this piece of paper, drinking my coffee. Let me say this, that there might be some language in this video. Who knows? But let's get into this. In February of 1891, the first few ads started appearing in newspapers. Ouija, the wonderful talking board. It boomed a Pittsburgh toy store. A magical device that answers your questions about the known, the unknown, the past, the present, the future, the material and the immaterial. Is that even a word? Immaterial? Another advertisement in New York declared it interesting and mysterious and testified as proven at patent office before it was allowed. $1.50. How did we go from $1.50 to however much they are now? Mine cost like $60 because I painted it. Now, this is the same board game that is now sold at Walmart in literally the board game aisle. It's a flat board with letters that are arranged in a semicircle, two rows, semicircle, with the numbers 0 through 9 at the bottom, with yes or no in each corner, and goodbye down at the bottom. It also comes with a planchet, one of these right here. It's not as pretty though. Which is a teardrop shape, usually with a small window in the body, used to move around the board. The idea of this board game was that 2 or more people would sit around the board and they would ask questions and then stare at the board dumbfoundedly, watching it move by itself. The only difference today is that the boards are usually made out of cardboard and the planchets are made out of plastic. The Ouija board was mysterious and fascinating. It had actually been proven to work at the patent office before the patent was allowed to proceed. Even today, psychologists believe that it may offer a link between the known and the unknown. And let me tell you, I've personally never had a Ouija board work besides my ex's meth head aunt twitching whenever she was touching it. Now, the real history of the Ouija board is probably just about as mysterious as how the board actually works, I guess, to some people. Robert Murch is a Ouija historian, and he has been researching the board since 1992. When he started his research, no one really knew the origins of this board, which he found kind of odd, that for such a thing that strikes so much fear and is fascinating to the American culture, it was strange that no one knew where it came from. Yeah, that's kind of weird, right? Started the whole Ouija kind of thing, it came straight from the 19th century, which spiritualism was a huge thing. Which, if you don't know what spiritualism is, it is the belief that the dead are able to communicate with the living. It hit America with the sudden fame of the Fox sisters. Now, the Fox sisters are from upstate New York, and they claimed that they received messages from spirits who hid on their walls to answer questions. Now, they recreated this in parlors around the state. Now, with the stories of these celebrity sisters, spiritualism hit quite a few Americans, and it became popular around the second half of the 19th century. And spiritualism, for some reason I can't say that word correctly, worked well for Americans, and it was compatible with the Christian dogma, meaning that one could hold a seance on Saturday night and not feel awful about getting up and going to church on Sunday morning. It was acceptable and even kind of wholesome to contact spirits through seances and during table turning sessions, which is whenever a bunch of people sit around a table and they place their hands on it. Once the table starts shaking, everybody says, "It's not me, it's not me." It also allowed comfort in an era where the average lifespan was less than 50 years old. And a lot of women were dying during childbirth, and a lot of children were dying from illnesses. Did you know that even Mary Todd Lincoln, wife of the amazing Abe Lincoln, held seances in the White House after her 11-year-old son passed away? It's crazy how we come from, communicating with the dead was common. It was, it wasn't bizarre. But now in this day and age, people look at you whenever you're using a Ouija board or doing seances and be like, "Why are you opening up the gates of hell?" But opening up the gates of hell wasn't on anyone's mind back then. Whenever the Ouija board was made, it was more like, hey, what's in your pocket? Are you willing to spend money on this? So as spiritualism grew in America, so did a lot of frustrations on how long it took to actually communicate with these spirits. Now, back in the day, before Ouija boards, people would sit there and they would recite the alphabet. Now, whenever they would recite the alphabet, they would sit there and they would wait for some kind of response. Like they would say A, and they would sit there and wait for like a knock or some sort of response so that they could spell out what, these spirits were trying to say. So obviously this was getting really boring and time consuming, and people were desperate for a quicker way to talk to these spirits. And a couple entrepreneurs created the Kennard Novelty Company, and they kind of really nailed it. In 1886, the Associated Press reported on a new phenomenon taking over the spiritualist camps in Ohio. The talking board, it was for all intents and purposes to talk to the spirit world. Of course, it was Charles Kennard who took this talking board and brought it to life. In 1890, he pulled together a couple of investors. There was Elijah Bond, who was a local attorney, and Colonel Washington Bowie, who was a surveyor who was there to exclusively make and market these new talking boards. Now, none of these guys were spiritualists. They were all businessmen who identified a niche. They found something that was working. The only thing they were lacking at this point was a name. Now, contrary belief is that Ouija is the French and the German words for yes. So, in order to find a name, they sat around a table. Now, Bond brought in his sister Helen, who was known to him as a medium, and they asked the board, "What should we call you?" And apparently it spelled out Ouija. Now, whenever they asked what is the meaning of this, it spelled out good luck. Helen would later admit that she was wearing a locket, and in this locket was a picture of a woman, and above the picture of the woman was the word Ouija. So later on, Murch said he would go and talk to the Ouija founders descendants, and he would look at the original patent. And he said that all of the stories are true. He said knowing that if they couldn't prove that the board worked, they wouldn't get their patent. So Bond brought his sister, Helen, with them to the office in Washington to file the application for the patent. There, the chief patent officer demanded a demonstration. He said if the board could correctly spell out his first name, which was supposed to be unknown to Bond and his sister, then he would proceed with the patent. They eventually all sat down and started to communicate with the spirits. It said that the board spelled out the officer's first name correctly, and that is how they got the patent. It is not known whether or not they actually knew the officer's first name or what. But February 10th of 1891, their patent was awarded for their new toy or game. Now, this patent did not explain how or why this game worked. It just stated that it did. That's kind of what sold this game, was the mystery on how it worked. It's like the less people said about it, the more people wanted to buy this thing. Ultimately, these people created something amazing. It was a huge moneymaker and nobody gave a shit how it worked. By 1892, the Kinnaird Novelty Company went from one factory in Baltimore to 2 in Baltimore, 2 in New York, 2 in Chicago, and 1 in London. By 1893, Kinnaird and Bond were no longer part of this company, okay? They stated that money changed everything, all right? And they owed money, blah, 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 so they were out. By this time, William William Fuld, we're going to call him that because apparently I can't read, was running the company. Later in 1927, he would die from a fall from a factory that the Ouija board told him to build. 1898, with the blessing of Colonel Bowie, the majority shareholder and one of the only 2 remaining original investors, he licensed the exclusive right to make the board. What followed were boom years and frustration for some of the men who had been on the Ouija board for years. Public fighting over who created this board was the main thing. During this time of all these feuds and stuff, there was a lot of rival boards that were being produced but like didn't go anywhere. It was not just spiritualists who bought the board. In fact, the people who disliked the Ouija board the most tended to be the spirit mediums, as I just found that their jobs were kind of cut out as the middleman in the spirit world. The Ouija board appealed to tons of people across like a wide spectrum of ages, professions, and education, because the Ouija board offered a fun way for people to believe in something. It's quite logical that this board would find its popularity in this weird time, you know, where death was like a huge thing. The 1910s and 20s witnessed a surge in Ouija popularity. It was so normal that in May of 1920, Norman Rockwell would depict a man and a woman kneeling down, playing the Ouija, summoning these spirits in the Saturday Evening Post. During the Great Depression, the company opened new factories to meet demands for the boards. Over a 5-month period, a single department store in New York City would sell over 50,000 boards in 1944. In 1967, a year after Parker Brothers bought out the company, 2 million boards were sold, outselling the game Monopoly. Now, strange Ouija stories started to make their appearance. 1920, National Wire Services reported that would-be crime solvers were turning to the Ouija board for clues in the mysterious New York murder of gambler Joseph Burton Elwell. The New York Times reported that a woman being sent to a psychiatric hospital tried to explain to doctors that she wasn't suffering from mania, but the Ouija board had told her to keep her mother's body in the living room for 15 days before she buried it in the backyard. In 1930, newspaper readers would read that two women, from Buffalo, New York. In 1930, newspaper readers thrilled to accounts of two women in Buffalo, New York who murdered another woman, supposedly on the encouragement of the Ouija board messages that they had received. 1941, a 23-year-old gas station attendant from New Jersey told them that he joined the army because the Ouija board told him to. Here's a funny one. In 1958, a Connecticut court decided not to honor the Ouija board will of Mrs. Helen Dow Peck, who left $1,000 to two servants and $152,000 to Mr. John Gale Forbes, a lucky but bodiless spirit that she contacted through the Ouija board. Ouija boards also at this time offered a lot of literary inspiration. There were a few poets like Mrs. Pearl Curran. She began writing poems and stories she claimed dictated from the Ouija board by a spirit of a 17th century English woman named Patience Worth. The following year, Curran's friend Emily Grant Hutchins claimed that her book, Jap Heron, was communicated through the Ouija board by Mark Twain, and Curran earned a significant success. Hutchins earned less, but neither of them achieved heights poet James Merrill did in 1982. The Changing Light of Sandover won National Book Critics Circle Award, implied that the Ouija board acted as more of a magnifier for his own poetic thoughts, rather than a hotline to the spirits. Now, here is where I get kind of aggravated, because you guys know what came out in 1973, right? Okay, The Exorcist did. Which in 1973, it kind of scared the pants off of everybody in the theater with all the freaking pea soup going around and the head spinning and all that shit. Apparently it was based on a true story, so everybody's gonna freak the fuck out, right? In this movie, the implication is that a 12-year-old Regan was possessed by a demon after she played with a Ouija board on, by herself. Whenever people seen this, it kind of changed their entire outlook on this board. Weird, because even in 1951, it showed Lucille Ball playing with a Ouija board in one of the I Love Lucy episodes, and then just 10 years later they're showing this shit in The Exorcist, and everybody's absolutely fucking terrified of a piece of wood. It's like almost overnight this Ouija board became the tool of the devil, and because of that it began popping up in more and more horror movies, which then gets inside people's freaking heads and they start thinking, oh shit, we can't summon the devil. Now, outside of the theaters, religious groups started to denounce the Ouija board and labeled as Satan's preferred method of communication. In 2001 in New Mexico, it was being burned on bonfires along with copies of Harry Potter and, get this, Disney's Snow White. Ouija boards enjoyed a dodgy reputation whenever Murch first started speaking at paranormal conventions. He was asked to leave his antique boards at home because they scared people. It's a freaking piece of wood. Parker Brothers and later Hasbro, after they bought out Parker Brothers in 1901, still sold hundreds of thousands of boards. But the reason people were buying them changed. They were spooky rather than the way to speak to spirits. But the real question everybody wants to know is how Ouija boards work. Okay, now here we're getting into the science part of this shit, and you guys are probably going to get bored, but it's fucking science. This is what you guys need to listen to. Scientists say that the boards are not powered by spirits or even demons. Disappointing, right? You have no reason to talk shit about Ouija boards. They are actually powered by us, even when we say we're not the ones doing it. were the ones doing it. Ouija boards work on a principle known as those studying the minds for more than 100 years, the ideometer. Now, scientists are actually looking into these movements, muscular movements from an unconscious will of the individual. You know, it's kind of like whenever you're watching a sad movie and you cry. That's kind of like what this ideometer is. Also, immediately, other researchers saw applications of the ideometer effect in the popular spiritualist past. In 1853, chemist and physicist Michael Faraday, intrigued by table turning, conducted a series of experiments that provided to him that the table's motion was due to the ideometer effect and actions of the participants. The effect is very convincing, as Dr. Chris French, he's a professor of psychology, he explains it can generate a very strong impression that the movement is being caused by some outside force, but it isn't. Other devices such as dowsing rods or more recently the fake bomb detection kits work in the same principle of non-conscious movements. Dowsing rods, Ouija boards, pendulums, all of that are all devices where a small muscular movement can cause quite a large effect. Planchettes in particular are well suited for these tasks. Many used to be constructed of a lightweight wooden board and fitted with small casters to help them move more smoothly and freely. Now they are usually plastic and have feet which also help it slide over the board easily. With the Ouija board, there's usually like a group of people, and in this group of people, everyone is a little bit of an influence. Not only does the individual give up some conscious control to participate in a group, no one person can take credit for the planchette moving, making the answers seem to be coming from somewhere else. Once this idea of these answers coming from somewhere else is implanted in the brain, anything is possible and can happen. Probably thinking, okay, if Ouija boards can't answer questions beyond the veil, then what the fuck can they do? They can actually do quite a bit. Some researchers think the board may be a good way to examine how the mind processes information on various levels. Okay, so now we're really getting into the science shit, so you better be ready. I know we're in this quite a bit now, so you're invested, so let's finish watching this, okay? A few years ago, a professor of psychology and computer science began looking at exactly what happens when people sit down to use a Ouija board. He had several foreign students that came in, and they wanted to know where the batteries went in it. But anyways, he left these students to play on them their own for a while. He left, came back a few hours later, and they were still playing. And at this point, they were a little bit, more scared than when he had left them. Now, at this point, the professor decided to do an experiment that involved a robot. Okay. Participants were told they were playing with a person in another room, okay, and that would be the robot. They were told to mimic the movements of the other player, a way to get the participant to think they were in control. They were asked a series of yes or no questions and expected to use the board to answer. What the team found surprised them. Whenever they asked verbally to guess the answer to the question, they were only right 50% of the time. Now, whenever they were told to use the board, they were right 65% of the time. So they found that the unconscious mind is like way smarter than the conscious mind. I don't understand that shit. It's science. I'm not a fan of science, I guess, but I am at this point because it proves that all you ignorant people should shut the fuck up. But we'll get back to that. So in the end, the Ouija board does offer a link between the known and the unknown, but not the known and the unknown that you were expecting. Ouija boards are completely harmless, and you all have absolutely no reason to be scared of them. So turn off the fucking TV and do some fucking research, and maybe you'll actually learn something for once. So I provided you with this amazing video to show you guys that it's all fucking science. You don't have to worry about me being possessed by a fucking demon because I have a Ouija board on my floor. Doesn't work like that. And I really hope you guys enjoyed this. hopefully you guys open your mind to something new for once. But until next time, guys, remember to be you, love yourself, and stay spooky. And I'll see you next time.